I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Gerry Wilson. Gerry is a 7th generation Mississippian. She grew up in the Red Clay Hills of the North. Her novel, That Pinson Girl, is forthcoming from Regal House Publishing on February 6, 2024. Her debut short fiction collection, Cross Currents and Other Stories, was nominated for the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Fiction Award. A Story, Lifeline, was a finalist in December Magazine's Kurt Johnson Prose Award for Fiction and was published in December Magazine in the spring of 2023. Her short fiction has been published in numerous other journals. Gerry has a Substack publication, Stories I'm Old Enough to Tell, where she writes about her journey to publication and reveals tidbits about That Pinson Girl. Welcome to the show, Gerry.
Thank you, Kara, so much. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who you are?
Well, you've hit the basics in the bio. I am a 7th generation Mississippian, not quite that far back on both sides of my family, but my roots go really deep here.
Yeah.
I'm a late bloomer as a writer. I was a high school English teacher for a long time, and sort of early on in my teaching career, I was really troubled by the fact that we were asking kids to write sort of formulaic essays. The 5-paragraph essay was a big deal in those days. And they learned to organize, which is a great skill to have. But it seemed to me that they were just lacking a voice.
Yeah.
They were not learning how to put their own expression to work on the page. And so, in a kind of foolhardy way, I guess, I went to the school's administration and said, may I have a creative writing class? Would you let me have a class that's just teaching them to write, nothing else from a creative standpoint? And I don't know what I thought the outcome of that would be, but I said yes. And so I realized, okay, if I'm going to try to teach kids to write, then I better learn something about it myself.
Yeah.
I did some really good workshops, one in particular for teachers at Bard College that was just invaluable. And I wrote along with the kids quite often because it just felt like it was setting an example for them to do. I didn't try to publish for a long time. And when I did, early on, I was writing short stories. And when I began to think about a novel, I was just in despair because I didn't think I could break out of that shorter form. I was so accustomed to that and I was comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And one day my husband said, well, a novel is just a longer story. It gives you, he's a college professor. He was an English professor.
Okay.
And a poet. And so it was sort of oversimplifying, but it was true. A novel is basically a story where you have more room to explore different aspects of plot, and you can go deeper into character, and you can enrich setting. There are just all kinds of things that you can do in a novel that you can't do within the confines of a story.
And I imagine that sitting down to write a novel at that stage, right, it does seem like an incredibly daunting task. I have never written a novel, so I feel like if I were to sit down and think in that terms, I'm like, oh my goodness, like how it just seems like climbing the tallest mountain in the world to do that.
Well, I'm not someone who plans a story out.
Okay.
I mean, I'll have an idea for a story, but basically I just write.
Yeah.
See where it goes, and that probably makes it a lot more complicated and a more extended process than it would be if I was able to outline and say, well, okay, I want to start here. I want this to happen and this to happen and this to happen. And ultimately, this is how I want it to end.
Sure.
I do frequently have some sense of where I want the story to wind up, but I'm not sure when I start how I'm going to get there. and that's just the way I work. And that is pretty daunting,
Yeah.
I guess, and probably makes for more revision than I might do otherwise. I've been known to go down some rabbit trails that I need not go down and have to back away and decide that's not really the way I want the story to go.
Sure. Yeah, I'm thinking as you were talking, back to, like you said, teaching kids to write in a 5-paragraph format. That is what I learned. And I
Mhm.
remember not really enjoying writing because it feels like you're trying to stuff things into a box to fit it, right? Like this needs to fit the intro. This needs to fit your 3 points. And I just, like you said, there wasn't much allowance, I guess, for creativity. I mean, you're writing and you're thinking and you're doing, but the creativity, I've always felt like, I'm like, well, I feel like I'm just forcing things onto the page and to fit into whatever section it needs to fit in.
Right. And it has its place. And as I
Yeah.
said, it's a great organizational tool. Students need to learn how to organize material, and it's good for that. But I just really felt they were missing a lot. I remember when I first started teaching creative writing, the ninth grade English teacher was a stickler for the 5-paragraph essay.
Okay.
And the kids would come to me just, if I said, you don't have to do that, it was like, what? You mean we don't have another way to do this? And there was, and we would ease into it. And I would start by giving them examples of different, even essays, longer essays with some personality that were not confined to just that spitting out of facts or
Yeah.
whatever. And it was eye-opening for them. It was eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
Too.
Well, I love that you were learning along with them in that process.
Yeah.
Where do you get your ideas for what you write?
Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's an artifact. Um, Sometimes it's a person I've observed. For example, in that Pinson girl, Leona, the teenage girl who gives birth to a child out of wedlock, is modeled on a young woman who lived down the street from us when I was growing up. Um, and nobody ever talked about it. And when I asked questions, I got sort of non-answers. But she lived with her son and her mother, and they were very much ostracized.
Yeah.
They were just isolated in the community. And I figured out ultimately, what was going on, that she had this son outside of marriage, and that was just back in those days. It was really taboo. So that was sort of the inspiration for Leona, for the main character in the book. Um, the novel is dedicated to my maternal grandmother
Okay.
because she was so influential um, in my life and had a terribly hard life herself. She only went through the 8th grade. She grew up so far out in the country in the hills of North Mississippi that was all that was available to her. And she never wanted people to know that. She was always embarrassed by the fact that she was not better educated. But she was incredibly smart
Yeah.
and very creative. She could grow absolutely anything. She was a terrific storyteller. She was sort of the keeper of family stories. And in fact, her story of her father's death, she always told the story that he was killed in a hunting accident that they were not sure was an accident. It could have
Yeah.
been murder. And that figures in the novel, Leona's father in an accident. Um, I have this wonderful artifact um, related to my maternal granddaddy, who went to France in World War I just very briefly. And after he got home, he got a letter, a little tiny thing. It's no more than maybe 4 inches long, the envelope, about 3 by 4 inches. A letter that had followed him from New York all the way to France and all the way back to Springville, Mississippi, which was just a wide place in the road,
Okay.
just the post office. It was written by a young woman he met in New York City on his way over
Wow.
France. And she wrote the letter on Armistice Day. And she describes people in the streets of New York celebrating. It is the most wonderful little piece of history. And the novel is set during World War One.
Okay.
There are unmailed letters that play an important part in the novel. The young man that who's the father of Leona's child goes off to war without realizing she's pregnant.
Okay.
And there's that inability to communicate that's an important part of the story. But anyway, I think a lot of my stories arise out of place. Yeah. I don't think I've written other stories not set obviously in the hills of North Mississippi.
Sure.
But the story just felt organic to the place. It's beautiful, but it's harsh.
Yeah.
It's a hard place for people to make a living, especially back in those days.
Sure. Well, that I am very intrigued. I feel like I'm like, oh, this will be the next book I'm picking up because historical fiction is my go-to genre.
Really?
Yeah, and I sometimes feel like we get mired in, or I do, in like the World War II genre, but I would love to read one set in World War One.
There were a huge number of really good World War II novels over the years, though.
Yeah, they are excellent, but sometimes I'm like, oh, I just need like a palate cleanser, almost because they are heavy at the same token. And my husband is in the Navy, and I've thought about this often when he's out on deployment, the ease of communication. And so I always think about back in the day when you had to send letters and you had to wait for a letter to come back. And I thought about that when he was deployed in 2020. It wasn't as reliable. I couldn't always talk to him, but I'm like, but at least it's not a letter getting maybe lost in the mail or lost in translation or.
Or even my first husband went to Vietnam.
Okay.
And we had 3 little children at the time. Yeah. And we communicated by radio phone.
Wow.
And it was so hard because we relayed somewhere in the Pacific and then to the United States. And half the time I couldn't hear him and he couldn't hear me. And there were delays, there was static.
Yeah.
It was more frustrating, I think, than anything. So
yeah. And then to have your children try to hear the conversation, right? Especially when they're small, they don't have the patience to wait for that.
Yeah, and he would send us cassette tapes. He would mail tapes that I could play for the children.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay, so listeners, we have That Pinson Girl by Gerry that you could check. Well, it's not coming out yet, right? I have to wait till February 6th.
Right, February 6th is Tuesday, but it's available to pre-order.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask.
The pre-orders are important. I didn't realize that. But
okay, so where can we pre-order, just so we can tell the listeners?
You could pre-order from Amazon, or you can pre-order from the publisher, Regal House Publishing.
Okay.
Noble. I expect the listeners are familiar with bookshop.org.
Yeah.
Where the sales go through a local bookstore that you designate.
Yes. The character that the indie bookstores provide to our shopping, right? And I anytime I can go to the independent bookstore, I'm like, that's where I'm headed.
Well, that's what we have in Mississippi is we have several really good independent bookstores.
Yeah.
There's one here in Jackson, Lemuria, that I just did an interview with the owner. Lemuria will be 50 years old in 2025.
Okay.
I just interviewed John, and the Regal House Publishing is going to publish that on their blog.
Yeah.
They have a book-bound blog where they feature indie bookstores, which is a really great relationship for an indie publisher to have with bookstores.
Yeah. Yeah, we're blessed to have quite a few here in San Diego as well. Because of my little kids, sometimes, shopping with three little kids, I'm like, oh, okay. So I haven't even hit all of the ones in the area, but we're slowly going along.
Yeah,
Check them all out because they all have their own, like I said, their unique character to them.
they do. They do. And that's one thing. There are a lot of days when I have to say I'm not proud to be a Mississippian. I'm sure you're probably aware Jackson has been in the news for a lot of the wrong reasons with
Yeah.
infrastructure issues and crime. And but we love Jackson. And
Yeah.
so I'm happy that we have this wonderful literary tradition
Yeah.
that we're proud of. And that's really, I was thinking earlier, I was thinking about this very question. Um, Maybe it's because this is such a complicated place that it lends itself to storytellers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of material.
Mm-hmm. And
Material
stories help us make sense of it, right?
do help us make sense of things when
Yeah.
maybe we can't otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Thank you for sharing. I have never been to Mississippi, but in my mind, we love traveling, and so we're not using the military, but as we move around, it's like, okay, the next place we live, we kind of try to see all the states around that area and travel and explore.
Yeah.
So, well, and then I have a couple other questions before we get over to who you are as a reader. But what have you learned about yourself through writing?
Oh my goodness, that's a hard one. Um, I learned that I could do it, for one thing,
Love
uh,
that.
because well, I was always a reader from the time I was very small,
Yeah.
which of course predated television. I think we got our first television when I was 10 or 11 years old.
Okay.
Um, so reading was always important to me, and my parents valued it for me. They read to me and they made sure that I had books.
Yeah.
But the writing part of it, um, I wrote a little mystery story when I was 8 years old, and my dad took it to his friend, the druggist, the local druggist, who was a sort of a mystery buff. He loved
Okay.
mystery books. And he was the father of one of my best friends. And when Mr. Francis liked it, I was just over the moon. I thought that was just the highest praise. But then,
Yeah. He had the street cred being the mystery guy.
yeah, but I think I did what so many young people do still. Um, they become overwhelmed by just doing the work they have to do. You do the writing that's required.
Yeah.
And unless you happen to have access to a creative writing class. So I have a grandson who's doing a fiction workshop at Ole Miss right now with Tom Franklin and just loving it.
Yeah.
Um, so there are lots of opportunities now that I didn't have.
Yeah.
Uh, what else did I learn about myself? It's interesting the things that I reveal in characters that I might not reveal about myself,
Okay.
just one on one
Yeah.
in a conversation with you. So
Yeah.
um, I've written a couple of, I'm an only child, and I've written a couple of novels about sisters in very difficult relationships.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what that says about about me because I was your classic sort of spoiled only child.
Yeah. I am always very interested in sibling dynamics because I did not have that. And my first career was I was a physical therapist. And so I feel like when I'd be sitting with patients for 45 to 60 minutes, a lot of times I would be asking them about their family and who they were. And it always, those sibling dynamics intrigued me. And even now with my husband, I'll be like, is this how siblings behave? Like, because I do have three kids myself, right? And I'm like, is this normal? And he'll be like, yep, total sibling relationships, but I'm like, I didn't have that.
Yeah, we missed out on that. And I have four sons.
Okay.
And that was an awakening.
Yeah.
Um, I remember walking and crying with the first little one when he cried because I just didn't know what to do with him.
Yeah.
Uh, but after the second boy, I was just a boy mom, and I sort of knew that was the way it was going to be.
Yeah. You have to embrace the chaos in that role because I
You
have
have
two
to,
boys. So,
yeah, you have to. That's a good way to put it. You have to embrace the chaos and get to the point where you're not. You have to keep the house picked up, and you have to do certain things, but you can't just agonize over whether you have a spotless house.
yeah. Yeah, it's never going to happen.
No, probably not.
Okay. Well, and then lastly, what do you wish you would have known when you first started writing that you do now?
I wish I had been more patient. Um, maybe patient is not the right word. Maybe realistic
Okay.
in terms of expectations. I think early on, um, well, I was naive. I would not have thought that it would take me 20, 25 years to get published.
Yeah.
That's a novel, particularly. Not that I was that confident that I was a good writer.
Hmm.
I didn't understand what the publishing business was like.
Yeah.
And I had to work through one really difficult period in particular when I had an agent at one point, and I was so thrilled to get an agent. Yeah, I've got an agent, you
Hmm.
know.
It sounds
Um,
promising.
yeah, that there were some flags that I should have noticed
Hmm.
and didn't, and he just basically ghosted me.
Mm.
And it was really to go from that kind of high
Yeah.
with that kind of optimism, well, maybe this is going to happen, with a
Hmm.
good um to the low of that relationship just going away was really, really hard. And I didn't write much for a couple of years
Yeah.
after that. And I wish I had not allowed it to impact me in that way. But I continue to write short fiction, and I have a couple of other novels in the drawer.
Okay.
But it was back during COVID that I was feeling just sort of desperate for something to do. And
Yeah.
this story, that Pencil Girl, that was called Spirit Light then, um, just really kept nagging at me. Um, and I knew, or I thought I knew, that it had greater potential than I had been able to develop it so far.
Sure.
And so I finally gave into that urge and I pulled it back up, and it was like doors began to open
Yeah.
that I couldn't see when I'd put it away maybe 3 or 4 years before.
Yeah.
I began to see. And it changed in some really interesting ways. And then the next step with that was to poll some friends about um, really sound independent publishers
Yeah.
and to avoid the whole agent route.
Yeah.
And so that's how I wound up with Regal House
Wow.
Publishing. Um, and they celebrate their 10th year in the spring next year. They're
Okay.
doing really well.
Yeah.
So I'm proud to be a part of that.
Yeah. The more I do this show and just hear the journey that you and the other writers have had to go through, it's pure admiration on my end that you have the perseverance of spirit to stick with it.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It'll be hard. And I mean, I get rejections all the time,
Yeah.
and everyone stings a little bit, but you get X number of rejections on one piece, and then you start to think, well, what do I need to, how do I need to look at this?
Yeah.
Or maybe sending it to the wrong places. There's always that too. You need
Yeah.
to be careful where you send your work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good advice. Do you do As you're now sending it out, do you do research to who you're sending these out to
Oh,
ahead of time?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
good piece of advice.
Time consuming, but you really need to
Yeah.
do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that last little bit of advice there. Let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about who you are as a reader. What genres do you enjoy?
I read mostly literary fiction, contemporary voices. I love um, Celeste. I don't know how you pronounce her name, Ing or Nig.
Yeah.
In
Mm-hmm.
yes,
Yes. Yep.
yeah. Um, I love Geraldine Brooks's historical fiction.
Yeah.
I've read almost all of her books, and I really enjoy her a lot. I like Jessamine Ward. I like Barbara Kingsolver,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Strout. Um, I could go on. There are
Yeah.
others, but those are probably my favorites.
Yeah. Your auto buy authors there.
No, yeah, I know that I'm going to read it. Oh, Ann Patchett. That reminded me, Ann Patchett.
Yes. Another beautiful author.
I really like her. I'm reading Tom Lake right now.
Yes, I know that has been on my list since it came out. Haven't got there yet.
It's good. I
Yeah.
like it.
Do you write daily?
Oh, I wish I were that disciplined. And
Okay.
with the book and trying to figure out marketing and publicity and
Sure.
all of that is really, my writing has suffered
Yeah.
because of it. Um, and it's just a necessary part of what we're doing, and I'm thrilled to be able to do it. But it really has cut into my writing time. And I've done things like I started the Substack, and
Yeah.
well, if you start a Substack, then you've got to try to maintain it. Um,
Exactly.
I'm trying to do that just about every couple of weeks. Um, I'm working on a couple of essays right now that I want to submit sort of as not about the book, but as companion pieces,
Hmm.
or sort of offshoots of the fictional story.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of writing that needs to be done. I am working on a collection of stories set on an island off the coast of Georgia
Okay.
that I really enjoyed working on, but I have maybe 3 or 4 that I consider really finished, and 4 or 5 more that still need some work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I had a author email me back recently and she's like, I'm so sorry it's taken me so long to get back to you. And she used the spinning plate analogy. Like I have all these plates spinning and I was thinking, my goodness,
plates.
because I do feel the same, even in the podcast world, right? Of like, I'm a one woman show over here. So to what you're saying, I feel the same. It's like, I don't want to start spinning a plate until I know I can devote the time for it and do it well. And I imagine, it's the marketing and the advertising and it's all of it. And so I feel what you're saying in a different capacity as a podcaster.
And it's pretty much up to the author to do most of that. And
Yeah.
if you spend a lot of money on a publicist, maybe not.
Yeah.
But if you can't, then um, it's sort of a steep learning curve to figure out what you can do on your own, which is fine.
Yeah.
Learning a lot.
Absolutely. And then it's navigating what's worth spending your time on too, right? Because there are so many options you could do. Well, you have been so gracious to prepare a book flight for us today as well. Can you tell us a little bit how they pair together?
Well, I was thinking about, I was a little intimidated by the book flight at first, and I thought, oh, so many books, so little time,
Yeah.
how do you narrow this down? And then I decided that I wanted to do women authors. And then it occurred to me that there might be a lot of your listeners who are not familiar with the Mississippi writing tradition.
Yes.
So I sort of zeroed in on 3 Mississippi writers who are women.
Okay.
Different generations. So they share a kind of Mississippi sisterhood, if you want to call it that, in terms of
I
their
love it.
writing. But I also realized, I was looking back today at these books, that they also share themes of family and particularly of motherhood and mothering and distant or absent mothers. And that resonates with me because Leona Penson's mother is very troubled.
Okay.
So without planning it that way, I think maybe my novel sort of falls into that tradition as well.
Yes. Oh, that is great. And I am definitely not familiar with the Mississippi writing tradition, so I am very intrigued to learn more about it today. What is the first book of the pairing?
The first book of the pairing is actually a book of short stories by Eudora Welty.
Okay.
Miss Welty, Miss Eudora, as she's known
Okay.
as here, was a wonderful writer of fiction. I want to say she won the Pulitzer. I should have researched that a little bit. I don't want to speak out of turn on that, but she won a lot of accolades in her day, and she's considered one of the great classic
Okay.
short story writers, particularly. The book I chose is her first collection called A Curtain of Green, and it's fairly typical of her short story writing. They're very much a product of her time, and so on the surface they do seem really Southern, and they sound Southern.
Okay.
I think when you read the stories to get to the heart of what she's saying, then you'll be both entertained and enlightened. Her stories have a lot of depth to them. What I thought I would do is talk about one story in particular that's one of my favorites, and that's a story called A Worn Path.
Okay. That's
And
perfect.
actually, my first exposure to this story was, I think, in an 11th grade literature anthology. It was there for me to try to teach to high school students.
Okay.
And I have to say, I had not read much of Welty before then, but I was really taken with this particular story. Um, it's a really poignant and moving piece. It's resonant issues of love and sacrifice and determination, but also there are those really difficult issues of racism and marginalization and cruelty. Um, it's a story about an elderly African American woman named Phoenix Jackson
Okay.
who makes this difficult journey by foot up through this very rural area to town to buy some kind of medicine for her little grandson who has swallowed lye and
Wow.
almost destroyed his throat. Um, and we learn in the course of the story that Phoenix has made this journey over and over and over again, and she'll continue to do so. And so I have to say something about the title, A Worn
Yeah.
Path. So
Yes.
it speaks to that. Um, it's interesting that some critics have raised the question about whether her little grandson has already died, and she continues to make the journey out of habit and out of
Okay.
memory, which I think that's an interesting theory, but I don't think we necessarily have to go there in
Yeah.
order to appreciate this story. Um, it's just so much more. It's about so much more than a grandmother's love for her little grandson. It's about the difficulties of this old woman's life
Yeah.
and her spirit. She has such an enduring spirit, and there's a wonderful voice. She has such a wonderful voice in the story because she sees things along
Yeah.
the way, and she expects a ghost to jump out from behind a tree.
Okay.
Um, there's one thing about Welty stories is they're almost always tinged with humor,
Okay.
but there's this underlying depth,
Yeah.
and that makes for such an interesting balance um, in almost all of her work.
That's amazing that she could strike both chords of
She
that.
can. She could do that. She could do that really well. And so she's my classic.
Okay.
She was almost a contemporary of William Faulkner's.
Wow.
Just a little bit younger than William Faulkner.
Yeah.
So that's the other Mississippi great going back in time.
Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
have a Century of Great Books challenge that I'm doing just personally on my own, where I'm reading a book from each year for the past 100 years. And I believe I
Oh.
have a Eudora Welty on there, but I can't remember which title I have and what year it is, but it is on my list.
Well, this was published in 1941. Some of the stories were copyrighted before that. And
Okay.
she continued to write and work into the 60s, well into the 60s, I
Yeah.
would think.
Well, I'll have to email you. When we get off, I'll go look. I have a spreadsheet
Yeah,
on my computer to help me keep track, and I've been rating them and keeping little notes because I wanted to see, because it has introduced me to so many books that I don't know that I would have ever picked up, right? Because I'm trying to be very intentional about getting one from each year. And
it's quite a project.
yeah, I think I'm a year and a half in. So it's been taking me a little bit, but I'm slowly but steadily working
Big
through it.
program and podcast. I don't know how you do it.
Well, I got to be able to talk about books on here.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it's Losing Battles is one of her novels.
Okay. I believe it was a collection of short stories was the one I have on there. So, um, is there one like that's called The Collected Stories of Eudora Welty?
It's probably a collected volume.
Okay, that might be what I have on there because that's what's ringing a bell right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I'll email you. I'll get back to you.
that. And I'm drawing a blank about the titles of her other collections.
Yeah.
Mm.
But yes, to your point, I don't know if you used this in motherhood, but books are my way of grounding myself in the day, right? Like if the world is chaotic in here, the kids go take a nap or have a quiet time and I pick up my book, and that is my way to like kind of ground back in to myself and put my feet back on the ground and have 20 minutes of just a woosah moment, a just calming moment.
Sure,
So
that's necessary. Good for you.
thank you. So, okay, well, what is the second book of our pairing today?
The second book of our pairing is Jessamine Ward's Sing Unburied Sing. Jessamine Ward is not quite a native Mississippian, but she moved to the Gulf Coast with her family when she was about 3 years old.
Okay.
And she still lives in a little tiny town called Delisle
Okay.
on the Gulf Coast. And her novels are set on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Sing Unburied Sing is the most recent before the one that has just come out called Let Us Descend.
Yes.
That I'm not sure about the setting. I haven't started it yet, but it's about a slave girl before the Civil War.
Yeah.
And so it's more historical than her novels generally are.
Okay.
But Jessamine Ward has won the National Book Award twice
Wow.
for the first novel called Salvage the Bones in 2011, and then in 2017 for the novel I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, she's amazing. I'll tell you a little bit about the book.
Yes, please.
Sing Unburied Sing. Jojo and his little sister are living with their grandparents on a farm on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, and sometimes with their mother, Leonie, who is in and out. Leonie is an addict. She's very troubled.
Okay.
So she's not a steady presence in the children's lives. And she's also tormented and comforted by visions she has of her dead brother.
Wow.
But those visions only come to her when she's high. And so does she welcome the visions or does she not?
Oh, okay.
The grandmother, Jojo's grandmother, is dying of cancer, and the grandfather is doing all he can to try to hold the household together and teach Jojo how to be a man.
Wow.
And when the white father of Leonie's children is released from prison, she sets out with a friend and their kids, packs them all into the car, and sets out on this trek across almost the length of Mississippi to Parchman Farm, which you may have heard about. That's the Mississippi State Penitentiary,
Okay.
that's been a long time. And it's a very dangerous journey. Ward's themes are dark.
Yeah.
Um, she engages with some really ugly truths about power and injustice and really complicated bonds of family, but she does it in language that is absolutely poetic. And there are touches of magical realism in this book that I was not prepared for. It made it a
Okay.
little difficult for me,
Sure.
but it's well worth a read. Any of her books are, I think.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that because she is an author I have heard her name mentioned multiple times. And I can say that I haven't picked up her book yet, but I was just telling Gerry before we got on this call, listeners, if you don't know yet, if you happen to have a Spotify premium account, they just added audiobooks are included with your membership that you pay. And they've had audiobooks on there for a long time, but you had to pay an additional fee for them. And I was like, well, I have an Audible account. Like, I don't need two. But I just went on yesterday and I happened to notice a thing popped up saying audiobooks now available. And I was like, oh. So I go and I click on it and they have over 200,000 titles for free included with your membership. And I was like, hallelujah. I was in the garage. We have a gym out there. And I'm like doing a little happy dance in the garage by myself. And actually, Jessamine Ward, her newest one, was the book I chose to download. And I'm just currently finishing my other audiobook, but that is in the queue for my next book to read. So what a small world that you're talking about it today.
up next for me too.
Yes. Okay, so that was Sing Unburied Sing by Jessamine Ward. And then what is the last book of the pairing today?
The last book of the pairing is Katie Simpson Smith's first novel, The Story of Land and Sea.
Okay.
Katie Smith is the youngest of the three writers. I'm not sure that she and Jessamine Ward are a generation apart quite, but
Okay.
Katie represents today for me the youngest generation. And of course, there are others like Angie Thomas has
Yeah.
been a wildly successful
Yeah.
author. Angie is a Mississippi writer.
Okay. I didn't
Um,
know she was from there.
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. See, the the stories are in the blood some way.
Yeah. Wow.
But Katie's book, and I will say it's a shame to have to single out one younger author, but because there's several we could talk about. Katie was born and grew up in Jackson, Mississippi.
Okay.
Um, she has an MFA from Bennington and a PhD from UNC Chapel Hill. Katie's novels so far are historical novels, and they are absolutely meticulously researched. But she does such a remarkable job of weaving the details into the fiction
Yeah.
that they feel just entirely organic to the work. At least for me, they do. It's not like she's giving me a paragraph of background to pre-Revolutionary War times, which is when this novel is set. Um, they are couched in such a tightly woven story and told in such beautiful language that they're just a part of the work, and she does a great job with that. So if your listeners are fans of historical fiction, I highly recommend her.
That's me. Um, and I love learning about history in this format. That is why I love historical fiction because it's pairing events in time that maybe I heard about back in school, right? But when you read it in the form of a story or in literature, how much more meaningful that becomes, or you can place that in your brain. And I'll always remember from the books I've read these historical events where when I had to memorize verbatim for history class to pass the test, it's like it didn't stick.
Yeah, yeah. It's the power of story.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
power. It really
Well,
is.
yes, this will definitely be on my list as well. So, this was The Story of Land and Sea by Katie Simpson Smith. And how I like to end our show here is with our bonus pairings, which are just a speed round of questions. So, you can answer these really quick. Where is your favorite place to read?
Um, in this chair where I am right now, which has been my nest for reading and writing recently.
I,
Yeah,
I love that. It
I'd
looks
have
very cozy.
better posture if I worked at a desk, maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah.
This is a
Okay.
good.
As long as you have a good setup, my PT brain is like, as long as you have a good setup for your computer, you could sit in any chair.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But this is away from. It's at the back of the house. It's sort of away from things. So
Yeah.
not too close to the kitchen. It keeps me from snacking too.
Always a good thing.
Mm.
Okay. What is one book you have read that has changed your life?
Oh my goodness. That's a hard one. I think maybe a fairly recent book was Colin McCann's A Paragon,
Okay.
Airogon.
Okay.
Uh, My oldest son actually gave me that book a couple of years ago for my birthday. It's a big, fat book, and he highly recommended it. And when I got around to reading it, I could see why.
Yeah.
And it's particularly important right now with things happening in the Middle East the way they are.
Okay.
McCann has the novel has two storylines basically, and one is about an Israeli man who suffered a terrible loss at the hands of terrorists,
Yeah.
and the other storyline is about a Palestinian man.
Yeah.
And there is so much humanity in this novel. It's not an easy read particularly,
Sure.
but it is humanity on its deepest level.
Yeah.
And as I said, I read it maybe a couple of years ago, but it really was, it really had an impact
Yeah.
on me.
And I,
Granted, it's fiction, but it doesn't read or feel like fiction.
yeah.
Taken away all the trappings of government, and you've
Sure.
come down there again. You've come down to the stories
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. And I think that's where the empathy comes in, right? And how books connect us is we learn about other people's stories. And so it almost levels the playing field where we can let people in, right? You can see the humanness in one another.
Yeah. So
Beautiful. Okay, so definitely adding that one to my list as well. My list is growing today. I love it. Next question. Are you a rereader?
I'm not much of a rereader. I have good intentions. I've been thinking lately that the other books that really impactful on me in my life were a couple of Faulkner novels,
Yeah.
uh, Absalom, and Light in August are
Okay.
just terrific. Those books may be 75 years old, but they just speak to the heart of the difficulties of um, racial relations and family relationships and hardship and poverty. And they're just wonderful books. So one of these days, maybe next summer,
Okay.
after things settle down a little bit, I would love to go back and do that.
Yeah. After your book launch a little bit and let that calm down, and then you can have some time back to yourself.
Maybe so.
And then last question here. What are you reading next?
Well, I'm reading Tom Lake right now and Patch's book, and next, I actually have it on my Kindle, is Ann Napolitano's Hello Beautiful.
Yep, I just got that off my hold list at the library. It's on my
Yeah,
evening stack.
yeah. Um, yeah, I belong to a really savvy book group that some of those women have been together for 40 years, and
Wow.
I'm a newbie. I've only been a member for 20. Um,
I thought you were going to
but
say 1 year, but here you 20. That's
you
amazing.
know, no, and I'm the new kid on the block, at 20 years.
Yeah.
But we sort of hold each other accountable. We read some pretty challenging things, and then we read some things for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I
That's a
just
good.
got a book club started here. That's one of the ways I create community as I move with the military is creating a book club, and I'm happy to report I finally knew enough people locally to create a book club, and we have actually speaking of some difficult reads on our list. We have Demon Copperhead on our list for this
Oh,
year.
a terrific novel.
Yeah. But I've heard it's a heavy topic. So
It's a really heavy topic. It's a heartbreaking book, as
yeah.
so many great books are. They're
Yeah.
heartbreaking on some level. They
Yeah.
really just grab your heart.
Yeah. So that's our probably toughest read we have on the list for the year, but I'm really excited. I'm just so excited that I knew enough people to ask to be part of a book club locally, because I think there's something about that connection, right? Where like a Zoom call I've done, but when you have a local group that you can meet with, there's something special there.
Special, really important. Yeah.
Well, last question here. I know you said you've started an Instagram account. So how could the listeners find you?
On Instagram, you want my username?
Yes. Yeah, that would be great.
It's Gerry Wilson _writer.
Okay.
No periods or anything, no caps. Gerry with a G, Gerry.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'll have links to pre-order your book in the show notes as well, so listeners can do that. But I thank you so much for your time today, for coming on the show. I know it's precious, and I appreciate all that you've given me.
You just made it so easy and so special. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Gerry Wilson and her book flight of books featuring the Mississippi Sisterhood of Writers. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information about today's book flight or other books that we talked about. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are reading next, especially if you have heard about it on the show, please tag us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.